The metal floor was cold against Captain Lee Taeho's knees as two Calaxian guards dragged him down the long corridor. His hands were bound behind his back with energy shackles that glowed blue in the dim light of the alien ship. Blood dripped from a cut above his left eye where a guard had struck him during his capture. The Calaxian battleship Dominion's edge was massive. The corridors seemed to stretch forever in all directions. Strange symbols covered the walls, and the air smelled like burnt metal and something sweet that made his stomach turn. The ship hummed with power that he could feel in his bones. "Move faster, human!" growled the guard on his right. The alien was tall and thin, with gray skin and black eyes that had no pupils. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. Taeho kept his head up as they walked. He had been on a peaceful diplomatic mission to the outer colonies when the Calaxians attacked his transport ship. His crew had fought bravely, but they were outnumbered 10-1. The last thing he saw before they stunned him was his ship exploding in a ball of fire. They turned a corner and entered a large room filled with Calaxian officers. The aliens stood around a holographic display showing star maps. At the center of the group was Admiral Veltar, a creature even taller than the others with scars covering half his face. "Ah, the human captain," Admiral Veltar said with what might have been a smile. It was hard to tell with Calaxian faces. "Welcome aboard my ship. I hope your stay will be educational." The other officers laughed. It was a sound like metal scraping against stone. "You made a mistake attacking my ship," Taeho said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The Terran Exploration Corps will come looking for me." "Your Terran Corps?" Admiral Veltar walked closer. "They are insects compared to the might of the Calaxian Empire. By the time they organize a rescue mission, you will be long dead." One of the guards reached into Taeho's jacket and pulled out a worn leather journal. The book was old and weathered. Its pages were filled with drawings and notes that Taeho had made over many years. "What is this?" the guard asked, flipping through the pages. Admiral Veltar took the journal and looked at it. His black eyes grew wide for a moment, then he began to laugh. It started as a low rumble but grew louder until it filled the room. The other officers joined in. "Dragons!" Admiral Veltar said between laughs. "The human believes in dragons." He held up the journal so the others could see. The pages were covered with detailed drawings of massive creatures with wings and long necks. There were notes about their behavior, their habitat, and their history. Years of careful research and observation. "Look at this," said Commander Relvox, pointing at one of the drawings. "He thinks these mythical beasts are real. How primitive can these humans be?" "Even our children know that dragons are just stories," another officer added. "Fairy tales to frighten younglings." Taeho watched them mock his life's work. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. These aliens had no idea what they were looking at. They saw drawings of myths and legends. They could not see the truth that lay beneath. "Tell me, human," Admiral Veltar said, stepping closer. "Do you really believe in these creatures? Do you think dragons will come to save you?" "You would not understand," Taeho replied quietly. "Try me," the Admiral said. "I find human superstitions amusing." Taeho looked around the room at all the sneering faces. These beings had conquered dozens of worlds. They had enslaved entire species. They thought themselves the masters of the galaxy, but they knew nothing about the real powers that moved through space. "Dragons are not myths," he said finally. "They are older than your empire, older than most stars. They choose not to involve themselves in the affairs of younger races." The laughter grew louder. Admiral Veltar wiped what might have been tears from his eyes. "Older than stars," he repeated. "The human thinks invisible monsters control the galaxy." Commander Relvox snatched the journal from the Admiral's hands. "Worthless scribblings," he said, and threw it across the room. The book hit the wall and fell to the floor. Some of the pages scattered. Taiho watched his journal fall apart. 3 years of work, 3 years of careful notes and observations, 3 years of learning about creatures that most beings in the galaxy thought were legends. Take him to the detention block, Admiral Veltar ordered. Level 7, maximum security. I want him to have time to think about how his dragons will rescue him. The guards grabbed Taiho's arms and pulled him toward the door. As they left the room, he could still hear the officers laughing behind him. The detention block was deep in, the ship's belly. The corridors here were darker and the air was stale. They passed rows of cells filled with prisoners from many different worlds. Some watched him with curious eyes. Others had given up hope long ago. They stopped at cell 47B. One of the guards pressed his hand against a scanner and the energy barrier flickered off. They pushed Taiho inside and the barrier came back up with a soft humming sound. The cell was small and empty except for a metal bench built into one wall. There was no window, just 4 gray walls and a ceiling that glowed with dim light. The floor was cold and the air tasted like recycled oxygen. Taiho sat on the bench and looked around his new home. He could feel the ship moving through space, traveling to some unknown destination. The Calaxians probably planned to use him as a bargaining piece against Earth. Or maybe they would just execute him for sport. But as he sat alone in the darkness, Taiho smiled slightly. Admiral Veltar and his officers had made a critical error. They assumed that dragons were myths because they had never seen one. They laughed at his journal because they could not imagine such creatures existing. What they did not know was that Taiho carried something inside him that no scanner could detect, something that no energy shackle could bind, a gift that connected him to beings of immense power and ancient wisdom. He closed his eyes and reached out with his mind, sending his thoughts beyond the metal walls of the ship, out past the star, systems, and into the deep void where few dared to travel, to places where legends lived and breathed and waited. The call went out into the cosmic winds, carried on waves of energy that only certain beings could detect. A message of distress from one who had been chosen long ago to bridge the gap between worlds. The Calaxians thought they had captured just another human. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake in their empire's history. Somewhere, in the vast darkness of space, ancient eyes opened. The call had been heard. 3 years ago, Koreth Prime had been just another dead world on the edge of known space. Captain Lee Taiho remembered walking through the ancient ruins under 2 purple suns. The archaeological team had been excited about the strange metal, structures they found buried in the sand. Dr. Kim Young-ho had called it the discovery of the century, but Taiho had wandered away from the main dig site. Something had been calling to him from the northern canyon. A feeling he could not explain pulled him toward the rocky cliffs where the wind howled between the stones. The dragon had been dying when he found it. Ethros the Starburner lay trapped beneath a fallen cliff face. The creature was bigger than anything Taiho had ever seen. Its body stretched over 200 meters from nose to tail. Wings that could have covered a city square were pinned under tons of rock. Scales that looked like polished metal caught the light of the twin suns. Most people would have run. The thing looked like death itself with its massive claws and teeth like sword blades. But Taiho had seen something else in those golden eyes. Pain, sadness, and something that looked almost like hope when the dragon saw him approach. The dragon's voice had filled his mind without any sound at all. "You are not afraid," it had said. The words appeared in his thoughts like ripples on water. "Should I be?" Taiho had asked out loud. "All the young races fear us. They see only teeth and claws, and fire. They do not see what we truly are." Taiho had climbed over the fallen rocks to get closer. The dragon's breathing was shallow and labored. Green blood seeped from wounds where the stones had crushed its ribs. "What are you?" he had asked. "We are the first," Ethros replied. "Before your species learned to make fire, we sailed between the stars. Before your son was born, we built cities in the void. We watched galaxies form and die." The dragon shifted slightly and winced in pain. "But we grew tired of the endless wars of the younger races, tired of seeing worlds burn for greed and pride. So we withdrew to the deep places where few dare to follow." Taiho had spent 3 days with the dying dragon. He brought water from his supplies and tried to make the great creature comfortable. Ethros told him stories of the ancient times, of dragon cities that floated in space, of the Great Roost where the Dragon Conclave made decisions that shaped entire star systems. "Why are you telling me this?" Taiho had asked on the second day. "Because you listened," Ethros replied. "In 10,000 years you are the first to approach without weapons, the first to see past our fearsome appearance to what lies beneath." On the third day, poachers had arrived. Taiho learned that someone had been hunting dragons for their scales and blood. Ethros had been defending a nest of young dragons when the cliff had collapsed during the battle. The dragon had looked at him with those ancient golden eyes. "I am dying, young one. But before I go, I can give you a gift, something that has not been shared with any non-dragon in 1,000 generations." Taiho felt something warm flow into his mind. Knowledge, understanding, a connection to something vast and powerful that existed beyond normal space and time. "You are now bonded to dragon kind," Ethros had whispered. "You can speak with any of us across any distance. You carry our voice and our trust." The great dragon had lifted its massive head one last time. "Find the others. Tell them that not. All of the young races are lost to greed and war. Tell them there is still hope." Ethros the Starburner had died as the second sun set behind the canyon walls. His body had dissolved into points of light that drifted up toward the stars like glowing snow. Taiho had stood alone in the ruins until his team found him the next morning. He never told anyone what really happened on Koreth Prime. Who would believe him? Instead, he started keeping a journal. He drew pictures of Ethros and wrote down everything the dragon had told him. He began researching old legends and myths from dozens of worlds. Every story was the same. Massive creatures with wings that could eclipse moons. Beings of terrible beauty and power who had vanished from known space long ago. The details changed from world to world, but the core truth remained. Dragons were real. They had always been real. Now, sitting in his cell aboard the Calaxian ship, Taiho closed his eyes and reached out with the gift Ethros had given him. His mind traveled beyond the metal walls, beyond the star systems, into the deep void where ancient powers waited. Meanwhile, millions of kilometers away, Lieutenant Park Jisoo paced the bridge of the human vessel Resilient Dawn. She had been Taiho's friend since their academy days. They had served together on 5 different ships over the years. "Any word from the search teams?" she asked Captain Nam Hyok. The older man shook his head. His gray hair was messy from running his hands through it. "Nothing yet. The debris field is too scattered. We found pieces of the transport ship, but no sign of survivors." "He is alive," Jisoo said firmly. "I know Taiho. He would not give up easily." Captain Nam Hyuk studied the star charts on the main display. "The Calaxians took him somewhere, but their space is vast. We could search for years and never find him." "Then we search for years," Jisoo replied. "We do not abandon our people." The bridge crew worked in tense silence. Everyone knew the odds were against them. The Calaxian Empire controlled dozens of star systems. They could be holding Taiho on any one of 1,000 ships or stations, but Jisoo refused to give up hope. She had seen Taiho do impossible things before. During their last mission together, he had somehow convinced a group of hostile aliens to release their prisoners without firing a single shot. He claimed it was just good diplomacy, but she had always suspected there was more to it. There had been other incidents, too. Times when dangerous space creatures had suddenly turned peaceful in his presence. Moments when he seemed to know things he should not know. She had never questioned him about it, but she wondered if her old friend was hiding secrets. In the deep void beyond known space, something ancient stirred. The call had been heard. Golden eyes opened in the darkness between stars. Wings that had not moved in centuries began to unfold. The dragons were awakening, and they remembered the young human who had shown kindness to one of their own in his final moments. The rescue of Lee Tae-ho was about to become something much larger than anyone could imagine. 3 days had passed since Captain Lee Tae-ho sent out his silent call into the void. The Calaxian guards brought him water and tasteless food twice a day. They said nothing to him, and he said nothing to them. But deep inside, he could feel something building, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. On the bridge of the Dominion's edge, Admiral Veltar studied the navigation charts. His fleet was heading toward the Calaxian homeworlds with their new prisoner. He planned to use the human captain as leverage against Earth. The Terran Exploration Corps would pay well to get their man back. "Admiral," called out Navigation Officer Kex Allen from his station, "I am getting strange readings from our sensors." "What kind of readings?" Veltar asked without looking up from his charts. "Mass signatures that should not be there. Large objects moving parallel to our course. But when I try to focus the sensors, there is nothing." Commander Relvox laughed from his position near the weapons console. "Probably radiation from the nearby nebula. Those gas clouds play tricks on our equipment." Kex Allen frowned at his displays. "I have never seen radiation patterns like this, Commander. The signatures are too regular, too purposeful." "Purposeful?" Admiral Veltar finally looked up. "Explain." "The objects seem to be matching our speed and heading, as if they are following us." Veltar walked over to examine the sensor readings himself. The displays showed empty space around their fleet, but the mass detectors insisted something large was out there, something that moved with intelligence and purpose. "Run a full diagnostic on all sensors," he ordered. "I want to know if we have equipment failures." In his cell far below, Tae-ho smiled quietly. He could feel her presence now. Ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond understanding. Zephyrian Voidwing had answered his call. The dragon's voice filled his mind like music made of starlight. "Young speaker, we have felt your distress. The Conclave has heard your cry for help." "Zephyrian," Tae-ho whispered to the empty air. "I was beginning to wonder if anyone would come. We are always listening. But we do not often act. Tell me, why should the first involve themselves in the conflicts of younger races once again?" Tae-ho chose his words carefully. He knew that dragons measured time in centuries and millennia. To beings who had watched stars being born, the rise and fall of empires was like the changing of seasons. "Because the Calaxians are different," he replied. "They do not just conquer worlds, they destroy cultures, they enslave entire species. If they continue unchecked, they will bring darkness to this entire region of space." "And why does this concern us? We have withdrawn from such affairs for good reason." "Because you once told me that dragons watch over the balance of things. The Calaxians tip that balance toward chaos and suffering." There was silence in his mind for several moments. Then Zephyrian spoke again, and Tae-ho could hear something like approval in her mental voice. "Aethros chose well when he bonded with you. Very well, young speaker. We shall make ourselves known." On the bridge, the sensor readings were getting stronger. Whatever was out there was getting closer. Admiral Veltar ordered the fleet to battle stations. 20 Calaxian warships powered up their weapons and shields. "Still nothing on visual," reported scanner technician Mordex. but the mass readings suggest objects the size of our largest dreadnoughts. Impossible, Commander Relvox said. No ship could hide from our sensors at this range. That was when the first dragon decloaked. Zephyrian Voidwing materialized off their starboard side like a mountain appearing from mist. Her scales shimmered, with colors that had no names, shifting from deep purple to brilliant silver as cosmic radiation played across her massive form. Her wings stretched wider than 3 battleships placed end to end. Silence fell across the bridge. Every Calaxian stared at the impossible sight outside their viewports. The creature was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Ancient power radiated from her like heat from a star. "By the void," whispered Navigator Kexallen. "It really exists." More dragons appeared around the fleet. 12 in total, each one unique in coloring and size. Some had wings that looked like they were made of liquid starlight. Others bore scales that reflected the colors of nearby nebulae. All of them dwarfed the Calaxian warships. Admiral Veltar's hands shook as he gripped the edge of his command chair. Battle stations. All ships, target the creatures and prepare to fire. "Admiral," Weapons Officer Thexara said in a trembling voice, "our targeting systems cannot lock onto them. The readings are too chaotic." "Then fire at will. Saturate the area with plasma bursts." But before any Calaxian ship could fire, the dragons demonstrated their power. Zephyrian Voidwing opened her massive jaws and breathed a stream of energy that looked like liquid lightning. The beam struck the shields of the lead warship and drained them completely in seconds. The other dragons followed suit, beams of focused energy, balls of plasma, and waves of electromagnetic force washed over the Calaxian fleet. Not to destroy, but to disable. Within minutes, every ship had lost weapons and shields. Their engines sputtered and died. In the detention block, other prisoners pressed against their cell barriers to stare out the small viewports. They had never seen anything like the magnificent creatures that surrounded the fleet. Some fell to their knees in awe. Others wept with joy, thinking their gods had come to save them. Lieutenant Colonel Ko Minho, a Korean military strategist who had been captured during the battle for the Centauri colonies, watched everything from his cell across the corridor. "From Taiho." "You knew this would happen," Minho called out. "Somehow you called them here." Taiho stood at his own small viewport, watching Zephyrian's massive form glide past like a living starship. "I sent out a message. I hoped someone would hear it." "What are they?" asked Dr. Song Mirai from the cell next to Minho's. She was a xenobiologist who had been studying alien life forms when the Calaxians captured her research station. "They are the first," Taiho replied. "The oldest sentient species in the galaxy. They ruled the stars before any of our worlds had life. On the bridge, Admiral Veltar received a communication that made his blood freeze. The voice spoke directly into every mind on the ship at once. Ancient, patient, and utterly certain of its power. Calaxians. You have captured one who is under our protection. You will release him and all other prisoners immediately. You will also answer for your crimes against peaceful civilizations throughout this region of space." The voice belonged to the largest dragon, one whose scales looked like polished obsidian shot through with veins of gold. This was Stormheart, the Eternal, eldest of the Conclave. Admiral Veltar tried to speak but found his voice had abandoned him. Around the bridge, his officers stood frozen in shock and fear. The creatures they had mocked as myths now surrounded their entire fleet like hunters around cornered prey. In his cell, Taiho smiled as he felt the tide of battle turning. The dragons had come as he hoped they would. Now the real negotiations could begin. The Calaxian Empire had built its power on fear. For 300 years, their fleets had swept across star systems, crushing any resistance with overwhelming force. No enemy had ever made them feel helpless. Until now. Admiral Veltar stared at the massive dragon floating outside his bridge viewport. Stormheart the Eternal was over 3 kilometers long from nose to tail tip. Her obsidian scales caught the light of distant stars and threw it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When she moved her great head, space itself seemed to bend around her. "Impossible," Veltar whispered. "Our scientists proved that creatures this large could not exist in space. The physics do not work." His science officer, Dr. Kelmeron, was studying the sensor readings with shaking hands. "Admiral, these beings are not following our understanding of physics. Their bodies generate their own gravitational fields. They create localized space-time distortions that allow them to move faster than our ships. And the energy signatures they produce are beyond anything we have ever seen." Commander Relvox, who had thrown away Tejo's journal 3 days earlier, was now pale with terror. "What do we do, Admiral? Our weapons cannot penetrate their natural defenses. Our engines are dead. We are completely at their mercy." Through the ship's communication system, Stormheart's voice reached every Calaxian on every vessel in the fleet. The mental words carried the weight of eons. "Children of the younger races, you have forgotten the old ways. You believe that strength comes only from weapons and numbers. You have forgotten that true power comes from wisdom and purpose." In his cell, Tejo felt the connection strengthen between himself and the dragons. Zephyrian's mental voice was warm in his thoughts. "The Conclave has watched the Calaxian Empire for many cycles. They have conquered 47 worlds in the past century. They have enslaved 12 sentient species. They have destroyed irreplaceable cultures and reduced proud civilizations to ash. But they can change," Tejo replied silently. "All species can learn and grow, even the Calaxians." "You still believe in mercy for those who showed you none?" "Mercy is not weakness. It is the strongest choice of all." Zephyrian's amusement rippled through his mind. "Ethros was right about you, young speaker. Your heart sees possibilities where others see only problems." On the bridge, Admiral Veltar was trying to regain some measure of control. He activated the fleet-wide communication system and spoke to the dragons directly. "I am Admiral Veltar of the Calaxian Imperial Fleet. We demand safe passage to continue our mission. Release our ships immediately or face the consequences." The laughter that followed was not cruel, but it was utterly without fear. Stormheart's response came like thunder in their minds. "Consequences? Young Admiral, your species learned to build starships only yesterday in the measure of our years. We sailed between galaxies when your star was still forming from cosmic dust. What consequences could you possibly threaten us with?" Dr. Song Mirai pressed her face against her cell viewport to get a better view of the dragons. As a xenobiologist, she was witnessing something that rewrote everything science knew about life in space. The bioluminescent patterns on their scales, she called out to Tejo. "Are they communicating with each other through light?" "Among other ways," Tejo replied. "They can speak mind to mind across any distance. But they also use color, movement, and vibrations through space itself. They have 17 different methods of communication that we know of." Lieutenant Colonel Ko Minho had been studying the tactical situation from his cell. "How many of them are there? This cannot be their full strength." "No one knows the true number," Tejo said. "Some say thousands. Others believe there are millions living in the deep void between galaxies. They gather in the Great Roost to make decisions, but only the most important matters bring them together." Outside the ship, the dragons began to move in complex patterns around the disabled Calaxian fleet. Their movements created streams of colored light that painted aurora patterns across the darkness of space. It was beautiful beyond description and terrifying in its display of coordinated power. Stormheart spoke again, and this time her words carried the finality of judgment. "Calaxians, your empire ends today, not through destruction, but through transformation. You will release all prisoners in your custody. You will withdraw your forces from the worlds you have conquered without consent. You will make reparations to the species you have wronged. And if we refuse? Admiral Veltar asked, though his voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. Then we will ensure that your ships never leave this system. Your empire will collapse from within as your colonies lose contact with your home worlds. Your people will learn humility the hard way. To demonstrate their point, 3 of the smaller dragons moved toward the fleet's supply ships. They did not attack, but simply flew alongside the vessels. Wherever they passed, the ship's systems shut down completely, lights went out, engines stopped. Even life support flickered and died for several terrifying seconds before coming back online. "They are not damaging our ships," reported Dr. Kelmeron. "They are somehow interfering with the quantum fields that power our technology. It is as if they can manipulate the fundamental forces of nature at will." Commander Relvox was looking at his tactical displays in despair. "Admiral, every scenario I run ends in our complete defeat. These creatures could destroy our entire fleet without effort. Our only choice is surrender." But Admiral Veltar was not ready to accept defeat. He had built his reputation on never backing down from a fight. "Contact the human prisoner. Bring him to the bridge immediately." "Admiral?" Relvox asked in confusion. "If these creatures came here because of him, then he must have some influence over them. We will negotiate through him." 20 minutes later, Taiho was escorted to the bridge in energy restraints. The Calaxian officers who had mocked him 3 days earlier now looked at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Admiral Veltar stood before him, no longer the confident conqueror, but a desperate leader facing extinction. "Human, you called these creatures here. Tell them to leave, and we will release you unharmed." Taiho looked around the bridge at the frightened faces of his former captors. Through the viewport, he could see Zephyrian watching him with her ancient, golden eyes. Her mental voice was gentle in his thoughts. "The choice is yours, young speaker. We can end this quickly or give them a chance to prove they can change." Taiho studied Admiral Veltar's face. Beneath the fear and desperation, he thought, he could see something else, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even shame for what his people had become. "Admiral," Taiho said quietly, "the dragons are not here to destroy you. They are here to offer you a choice. You can continue down the path of conquest and cruelty until someone stronger than you destroys your empire. Or you can learn a better way." "What better way?" Veltar asked. "This is how the strong survive in a hostile galaxy." "No," Taiho replied, watching the dragons move like living poetry outside the viewport. "This is how the weak destroy themselves. True strength comes from building something worth protecting. Something greater than fear." The bridge fell silent except for the humming of damaged systems. Outside, the dragons waited with the patience of beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall like waves on an ocean. The fate of the Calaxian Empire hung in the balance of Admiral Veltar's next words. The silence on the bridge of the Dominion's edge stretched like a taut wire. Admiral Veltar stared at Captain Lee Taiho, his black eyes searching the human's face for any sign of deception or weakness. Around them, the massive forms of 12 dragons waited in the void like ancient gods passing judgment on mortals. "You speak of a better way," Veltar said finally. "But what do you know of survival? Your species has existed for less than 1,000,000 years. We Calaxians have ruled space for millennia. And in all that time, what have you built?" Taiho asked. "What legacy will you leave behind when your empire falls? Because it will fall, Admiral. All empires built on fear eventually collapse." Commander Relvox stepped forward, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. "Admiral, we must make a decision quickly. Our life support systems are failing on 3 ships. The dragons are somehow draining power from our entire fleet." Through the viewport, They could see Stormheart the Eternal slowly turning her massive head toward their ship. When those ancient eyes focused on the bridge, several Calaxian officers stepped backward involuntarily. The young human speaks wisdom. Stormheart's mental voice filled their minds. But words alone will not save your people, Veltar of the Calaxians. You must choose action. Admiral Veltar's hands clenched into fists. His entire career had been built on projecting strength and crushing opposition. To surrender now would mean admitting that everything he believed was wrong. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zephyrian Voidwing drifted closer to the bridge viewport. Her scales caught starlight and reflected it in patterns that seemed to tell stories of ancient times. When she spoke, her mental voice was patient, but firm. "First, you will release all prisoners held throughout your empire, not just those on your ships, but every being you have taken from their homes and families." "Impossible," Veltar replied. "We have labor camps on dozens of worlds, prisoners working in our mines and factories. Without them, our economy will collapse. Then you will learn to build an economy based on cooperation instead of slavery," Stormheart answered. "This is not a negotiation, Admiral. This is judgment." Dr. Kelmiron was studying his instruments with growing alarm. "Admiral, I am detecting massive energy buildups in the dragon biosignatures. If they decide to attack, our shields will not protect us." But Taiho raised his hand. "They will not attack unless you force them to. The dragons do not seek destruction. They seek justice." "Justice?" Commander Relvox laughed bitterly. "What justice is there in forcing us to release our workforce, in crippling our military? You are asking us to destroy ourselves." "No," Taiho said. "I am asking you to transform yourselves. There is a difference." In the detention block below, Lieutenant Colonel Ko Minho was watching the dragons through his cell viewport. Their movements had changed from the flowing patterns of before to something more precise and purposeful, like a military formation, preparing for battle. "Dr. Song," he called to the xenobiologist in the nearby cell. "Are you seeing this? The dragons are positioning themselves around specific ships in the fleet." Dr. Song Mirai pressed against her viewport. "The patterns look deliberate. They are surrounding the command vessels and the ships with the most weapons, but they are leaving the support ships alone." "They know our tactical structure," Minho realized. "They understand how our military works." In the cell across the corridor, a new prisoner spoke up. It was Engineer Choi Dae-sung, captured during the defense of a human colony. "If they understand our systems well enough to disable them selectively, they must have been studying us for some time." Dr. Song nodded. "The question is, how long have they been watching? And why did they choose now to act?" Back on the bridge, Admiral Veltar was faced with an impossible choice. Surrender meant the end of the Calaxian Empire as he knew it, but resistance meant certain destruction for his entire fleet. "If we agree to your terms," he asked Stormheart, "what guarantee do we have that you will not simply destroy us later when we are defenseless?" "You have the word of the Dragon Conclave," Stormheart replied. "We have existed longer than your son. We do not break our promises." "But you could change your minds," Veltar pressed. "Power corrupts even ancient beings." Taiho stepped forward. "Admiral, may I suggest a different approach?" Veltar looked at him with surprise. "You would help us? After we imprisoned you and mocked your beliefs?" "Because you imprisoned me and mocked my beliefs," Taiho replied. "This is exactly the moment when mercy matters most, when it is hardest to give and most needed." Through his mental link with the dragons, Taiho felt their curiosity at his words. Zephyrian's voice whispered in his thoughts. "What are you thinking, young speaker?" "A gradual transformation instead of immediate surrender," Taiho replied silently. "Give them time to change their society. Supervision instead of occupation. Partnership instead of conquest. You would trust them to honor such an agreement?" "I would trust you to ensure that they do." Aloud, Taiho addressed Admiral Veltar. The dragons could station observers throughout your territory, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. You begin releasing prisoners immediately and start making reparations to the worlds you have wronged. In return, the dragons provide protection from your enemies and share certain technologies to help rebuild what has been damaged. The bridge fell silent as everyone considered this proposal. It was not the crushing defeat that some expected, nor the escape that others hoped for. It was something else entirely, a chance at redemption. Commander Relvox was the first to speak. "Admiral, this could work. We keep our ships and our territory, but we change how we use them. It would mean admitting we were wrong," Veltar said quietly. "It would mean acknowledging that our entire way of life has been built on injustice." "Yes," Taiho agreed. "It would mean exactly that." Admiral Veltar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. Some showed fear, others showed hope, and a few showed what might have been relief. Finally, he looked out at the dragons waiting in the void. "If we agree to this arrangement," he asked, "will you release our ships and allow us to contact our home worlds?" Stormheart's mental voice carried a note of approval. "The young human has wisdom beyond his years. Yes, Admiral Veltar. We accept his proposal. But know this, we will be watching. Any return to your former ways will bring swift consequences." Veltar closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with new resolve. "Very well. I accept your terms. Guards, release all prisoners immediately. Communications, contact the fleet and order all ships to stand down. Tell them to begin preparations for prisoner releases across all occupied worlds." As his orders were carried out, Veltar turned to Taiho. "Human, I owe you an apology. When my guards threw away your journal, I thought we were discarding the fantasies of a primitive mind. I realize now that we were the primitive ones." Taiho nodded. "We all have room to grow, Admiral. That is what makes us better than our mistakes." Outside the viewport, the dragons began to move apart, their formation shifting from one of siege to one of escort. The immediate crisis was over, but the real work of transformation was just beginning. In the detention block, the energy barriers on all the cells flickered and died. For the first time in months or years, prisoners stepped free of their captivity. Some wept with joy. Others stood in stunned silence, unable to believe their ordeal was over. The age of the Calaxian Empire had ended. The age of the Stellar Alliance was about to begin. 6 months had passed since the dragons revealed themselves to the galaxy. The Calaxian Empire was no more, replaced by the Calaxian Republic under the watchful eyes of dragon observers. Admiral Veltar, now calling himself Director Veltar, had kept his word. Prison camps were being dismantled across 47 worlds, and reparations flowed to species that had suffered under Calaxian rule. Captain Lee Taiho stood on the observation deck of Dragon Embassy Station, a marvel of combined human, Calaxian, and dragon engineering that floated in neutral space. Through the massive transparent walls, he could watch young dragons learning to fly alongside human and Calaxian pilots. The sight still amazed him after all these months. "The council session begins in 1 hour," said Lieutenant Park Jisoo as she approached him. She now served as his aide and liaison officer. "The representatives from the Centauri colonies are eager to meet with you." Taiho nodded, but continued watching the flight training exercises. "How many species have requested membership in the Alliance this week?" 17, Jisoo replied. "Word is spreading fast. Everyone wants the protection of the dragons and the stability of the new government structure." The Stellar Alliance had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a peace treaty between dragons and Calaxians had evolved into a galactic confederation based on mutual respect and shared prosperity. Species that had hidden from Calaxian expansion for decades were now emerging to join the new order. "Captain Taiho," came a familiar voice from behind them. They turned to see Dr. Song Mirai approaching with her ever-present datapad. As the Alliance's chief xenobiologist, she had been studying dragon physiology and culture with their full cooperation. The Biological Integration Project is showing remarkable progress, she reported excitedly. The healing techniques that Zephyrian taught us are already saving lives in hospitals across the Alliance, and the agricultural improvements from dragon knowledge have increased crop yields by 30% on 12 worlds. Taiho smiled. And the dragons? How are they adapting? To contact with younger species again? Better than anyone expected, Dr. Song replied. Many seem to enjoy teaching. Yesterday, I watched Thornspike the Ancient spend 6 hours explaining stellar navigation to a group of Calaxian children. She was more patient than any professor I have ever known. Through the observation deck's communication system, they heard an announcement in multiple languages. All Alliance Council members please report to the main assembly chamber. The afternoon session will begin shortly. As they walked through the station's corridors, Taiho marveled at how much had changed. Humans, Calaxians, and dozens of other species worked side by side. Dragon observers, smaller and younger than the ancient ones who had confronted the fleet, moved through the halls offering advice and assistance. The main assembly chamber was a vast circular room with seating arranged in concentric rings. At the center, a raised platform allowed speakers to address the entire gathering. Representatives from over 60 species filled the seats, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. The chair recognizes Captain Lee Tai-ho of the Terran Exploration Corps, announced the session moderator, a reformed Calaxian diplomat named Kexolin. Tai-ho walked to the central platform and looked around at the assembled representatives. A year ago, most of these species had been enemies or strangers. Now they worked together to build something unprecedented in galactic history. Friends and colleagues, he began, we gather today to address concerns about the expansion of our alliance. Some worry that we are growing too quickly. Others fear that rapid change will destabilize existing governments. He paused as Zephyrian Voidwing entered the chamber through a specially designed portal. The dragon had become his closest advisor and friend among the ancient ones. Her presence brought a sense of calm authority to any gathering. The Dragon Conclave wishes me to remind you all, Taiho continued, that this alliance is not about conquest or control. It is about cooperation and mutual growth. No species is forced to join. No government is overthrown without the consent of its people. Director Veltar stood up in the Calaxian section. Captain Taiho speaks truth. My own people have experienced this transformation firsthand. We feared that admitting our mistakes would make us weak. Instead, we have discovered strength we never knew we possessed. Applause filled the chamber from representatives of species that had once been Calaxian subjects. The sight of former enemies supporting each other was still remarkable to witness. However, Veltar continued, we face new challenges. There are reports of other aggressive empires moving to fill the power vacuum left by our former expansion. The hegemony of the Outer Rim has been testing our borders. Lieutenant Colonel Ko Minho, now serving as the Alliance's strategic planning coordinator, stood to address this concern. Our intelligence suggests that 3 major powers are considering military action against Alliance worlds. They see our peaceful transformation as weakness to be exploited. The chamber buzzed with worried conversations in dozens of languages. Many of the newer Alliance members had joined specifically to avoid conflicts like this. Stormheart the Eternal, who had been resting quietly in a specially constructed alcove, opened her ancient eyes and spoke telepathically to the entire assembly. Let those who mistake mercy for weakness learn otherwise. The Conclave did not end the Calaxian Empire to see it replaced by others of similar nature. Any who threaten Alliance worlds will face the same choice once given to Admiral Veltar: transformation or consequences. The worried conversation stopped immediately. Even after 6 months, the power of the dragon still commanded absolute respect. But Taiho raised his hand for attention. The dragon's protection is invaluable, but it cannot be our only answer. We must build our own strength through unity and cooperation. The Alliance Defense Force is already showing promising results. Captain Nam Hyok, now commanding the Joint Human-Calaxian Task Force, stood to give his report. Our mixed crews are performing beyond expectations. Former enemies are learning to fight as allies. Dragon tactical advisors have improved our effectiveness by orders of magnitude. Engineer Choi Dae-sung, who had spent months working with dragon technology specialists, added his own observations. The defensive systems we are developing combine the best of all our technologies. Any aggressor will face not just our military strength, but innovations they cannot counter. Dr. Song looked up from her notes. From a biological perspective, the integration continues to amaze me. We are not just forming political alliances, but creating new forms of interspecies cooperation that science fiction writers never imagined. As the session continued, Taiho felt a familiar warmth in his mind. Zephyrian's mental voice was gentle and proud. You have exceeded all our expectations, young speaker. When Ethros first bonded with you, none of us imagined it would lead to this. This is just the beginning, Taiho replied silently. There are thousands of species in the galaxy who still live in fear and isolation. We can offer them hope. And you will, Zephyrian assured him. The Conclave has voted. For the first time in millennia, we will take an active role in galactic affairs, not as rulers, but as guardians of the peace you have helped create. When the council session ended, Taiho returned to his quarters aboard the station. The room was simple but comfortable, with a large viewport that offered a spectacular view of the surrounding space. As he prepared his reports for transmission to Earth, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him here. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Lieutenant Park Jisoo holding a familiar leather journal. "I thought you might want this back," she said with a smile. Director Veltar personally delivered it to my office. He had his people repair all the damage and restore the scattered pages. Taiho took the journal with reverence. It was his old dragon research, but now it had been expanded with new observations and insights from the dragons themselves. What had once been theory was now confirmed fact, illustrated, with details no human had ever recorded before. He also included a note, Jisoo added. He wants to know if you would consider writing an official history of first contact with the dragons, for future generations to study. Taiho opened the journal and saw the familiar drawings of Ethros, the starburner, on the first page. Below his original sketch, someone had added new details in elegant Calaxian script. A complete record of the ancient dragon's life and achievements, written by those who had known him personally. "Tell Director Veltar I accept," Taiho said, "but it will not be just a history. It will be a guide for others who might face similar challenges. A reminder that sometimes the greatest strength comes from choosing mercy over vengeance." Outside, his viewport, a group of young dragons performed aerial maneuvers with human and Calaxian pilots. Their formations spelled out messages of friendship in a dozen languages, visible across the star system. The age of isolation was ending. The age of unity had begun. And somewhere in the deep void between stars, ancient eyes watched with approval. As their youngest allies reached toward a future brighter than any they had dared to imagine, the galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly as it should be.